Well, hello, everybody. You have found Teacher Talk, and adjust this camera just a little bit. You have found Teacher Talk. We are continuing on our study of the book of Daniel. We're on Daniel chapter 3. And so if you'll grab your Bible or your tablet or wherever you have your Bible on and follow along, I'm going to be reading from the New King James Version. And Daniel chapter 3, verse 1 says, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. There's a pattern here if you don't see it. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all the kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So King Nebuchadnezzar had had a dream back in Daniel chapter 2, and Daniel interpreted it, but this dream was of a statue. And you remember the head of gold and the different parts of the statue were different materials and represented different Gentile kingdoms that would come after Babylon. And so this particular event that we're talking about here in chapter 3 actually takes place around the year 585 BC, as best as Bible scholars can figure out. It's about 20 years after Daniel was taken captive. And Nebuchadnezzar has kind of gotten to the breaking point with the Jewish people. He's lost his patience with the Jewish people. When he took Daniel and that first group of captives to Babylon, he had to go back once after that to dethrone a king and to reassert his sovereignty as ruler of Judea. And then he had to go back a third time. And when he went back that third time, he destroyed the walls, which made the city uninhabitable. He destroyed the temple, so they had no place to worship. And he took another group of captives back to Babylon. And so when they got to Babylon, they started telling everybody about the city. The walls are destroyed, the city's destroyed, there's no more temple, it's devastated. And so some of the Jews are thinking, well, God's through with us. He's just wiping us off the face of the planet because of our disobedience. But it's all part of God's plan. And that's what this chapter shows, is that, even when it looks like everything is falling apart, you got to trust God's plan. And it may not look like things are working out, but they will. God's plan is not usually very direct. It's kind of convoluted, you might say. But God's always got a plan, and he's always going to be working his plan, and we just have to trust his plan. So Nebuchadnezzar sets up this image of gold. Most historians think it was probably an obelisk. It wasn't a figure of a man or a human. It was probably an obelisk like the Washington Monument. It was made of about 4,400 tons of gold, so it was very visible in the hot desert sun, that it would be gleaming off of that gold. It was also a sign of Nebuchadnezzar's pride, because he figures since he's destroyed the temple and he's destroyed the city and captured all the people of Daniel's God, that he's figuring probably he's also destroyed Daniel's God. He's still not quite getting the fact that Daniel's God is the God, and all of his gods that he worships, Nebuchadnezzar and all the Chaldeans, they're just false gods. But he'll figure it out eventually. So he makes this obelisk. He sets it on the plain of Dura. Dura is a word that just means a section or a region that's walled or separated. It would be away from the main city of Babylon, out in the middle of nowhere. Just think of the Washington Monument out in the middle of the salt flats in Utah or Death Valley, California or something. So you couldn't help but see it, especially being made of gold, and the sun gleaming off of that gold, and it's out there. It's 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So you gotta imagine what this thing looked like. So he commands that when the music plays, everybody bows down and worships this obelisk. And he includes instruments from Persia, from Greece, from Babylon, all different kinds of instruments to include all different kinds of cultures and backgrounds and peoples. He also says of every nation, of every tongue, of every language. So he's trying to include everybody. You hear the music, you stop what you're doing, you bow down, and you worship this obelisk, which in turn means you're worshiping Nebuchadnezzar by extension. So this is not so much an attempt to establish a national religion as it is an attempt to find out if there's anybody in his kingdom that is not loyal. He's trying to root out any disloyalty in the kingdom. And so he institutes this practice to see if there's anybody that's going to defy his order, okay, basically. So as we move on, it says that, let me see, it says whoever disobeys is going to be thrown into the middle of the fiery furnace. And so it says in verse 7, so at that time when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, and the lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So everybody's doing this, all right? And this fiery furnace thing, Babylon had furnaces. They used these big, huge, gigantic furnaces to cure the bricks, to bake the bricks that they used to build their buildings and their walls. And if you've ever seen pictures of the ruins of Babylon that are in Iraq, that's a lot of bricks. So they had a lot of these ovens, these furnaces that they would use to bake their bricks. And we'll get into how they looked here in a moment. But this was also not an unusual punishment. Disobedient slaves, according to ancient documents, were often thrown into the furnace as punishment and executed. So this was something that was, commonly done. So verse 8 says, therefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. All right. So what they're doing is, remember that Daniel was promoted. His three friends were promoted above all these men that had been serving the king for all of their life. All of a sudden, literally overnight, Daniel is now their boss. And he's not even a Babylonian. He's not even a Chaldean. He's a lowly Jew. And so they're not happy about it. Daniel has made some enemies, and his friends have made some enemies. And it's a thorn in their side. And they have been looking for a way to discredit Daniel and his friends to get them out of the palace and out of their way. So verse 9 says, they spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image which you have set up. So they couldn't find anything on Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, or Daniel to accuse them. But now they've got something. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would not bow down and worship this gold image because as Jews, they were forbidden to worship any other god besides God. They were forbidden to worship or bow down to any graven image. Now, some people might say, well, they could bow down so it looked like that they were complying with the king's order, but they could still be praying to God. But we are judged by our behavior. And what we do on the inside is irrelevant. It's what it looks like we're doing that people are going to latch onto. And they're either going to say, oh, well, they're bowing down, so, they're betraying their God, or people are going to say, no, they're not bowing down, so, they're staying true to their faith and their beliefs. So they were determined not to bow down, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of compliance with their God and his rules and regulations and his requirements. So the Chaldeans go to King Nebuchadnezzar. They say, hey, these guys are not doing what you told them to do. And we don't know where Daniel was at this time. He was out of pocket. Maybe he was in another province taking care of something, or, we don't know. But this was a test for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, not for Daniel. So verse 13 says, then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, now he likes them. He says, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? And he doesn't even give them a chance to answer. He says, now if you're ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hand? So he's given them a second chance. He's given them a final chance to do what he told them to do because he likes them. They've never done anything to infuriate him or to go against the king, and he doesn't want to execute them. He doesn't want to see them die. But he's the king. He's got to administer justice as well. And then this last part, he says, who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? That shows his arrogance. He thinks that he has now defeated the God of Israel by destroying the temple and his city. And he's like, who's gonna take you out of my hands? I am Nebuchadnezzar. I am sovereign. I am king, and I am the one you need to answer to. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in verse 16 answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Now, this is interesting, and it bears a little bit of closer inspection. These three young men say that the God that they serve is able to deliver us. And then they say, but if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to you or to the golden image that you set up. People get the idea that God is obligated to bless us as long as we obey him. He's not obligated. He can do anything. He is able to do anything, but that doesn't mean necessarily that he's going to do it. We get confused between what he can do and what he will do. And these guys had it right. They said he can save us, but even if he chooses not to save us, we're still not going to serve your God or bow down to your God or bow down to your image. We are going to worship our God. So that was a great statement of faith by these men, and it showed their incredible faith in the fact that God could save them, but even if he chose not to, it was okay. So verse 19 then says, Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he spoke, and he commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. All right, so he says it says he's ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter. That doesn't mean that it's 700 times hotter. 7 is a number of completion. Basically, what he's saying is turn it up to maximum. Get it as hot as it can go, okay? And if he wanted to punish them for their disobedience and their disloyalty, that would not have been the way to go. The way to go would have been to turn it down so that it would prolong their agony and it would burn them slowly. But he turned it up. And as we're going to see in a few minutes, that's going to be so hot that 2 of his guards are going to perish. They're going to be burned up completely from the heat from this furnace. So verse 21 says these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, that was also unusual. Usually, if somebody was going to be executed, they would strip them of their clothes. They did that to Jesus. It was common practice. But apparently, Nebuchadnezzar was so infuriated at them that he just wanted to see them die. Okay. And so he just has them thrown in the furnace. Now, these furnaces were very tall structures. And there would be an opening at the bottom at ground level where they could put in wood and fuel, and they could also shovel out the ash. And then there were successive stories, I guess you would call them, chambers, as you went up to the top of the oven. The top of the oven would be vented to allow the fumes to vent, but there would be chambers all up the oven, the furnace, where bricks would be put in, and there'd be a hole in the center, and they'd have little shelves or platforms for these bricks, and you'd put these bricks in, and the heat would bake them. So probably, we don't know for sure, of course, but probably how this happened is the guards took these 3 young Hebrew boys up a series of stairs or ramps to the very top chamber. And so verse 22 says, therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they took them up to the very top chamber. And as they were pushing in these men who are tied up, who are fully clothed and tied up, flame belches out of the opening and just incinerates these men who pushed them in. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So they pushed them in. They went all the way down to ground level where Nebuchadnezzar was. He's down there. He's waiting to see 3 bodies, blazing fire, to fall down to the bottom of the furnace. Verse 24 says, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished. What is this? And he rose in haste and spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? And they answered and said to the king, true, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men loose, walking around in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And some translations say a son of the gods. Basically, what he's saying is, this looks like a human with divine abilities and attributes and characteristics. They're walking around in the midst of the fire. They're not screaming. They're not crying out in anguish and pain. They're not on fire. They're walking around. They're having a good time. They're, taking a coffee break. They're having a party. They're just walking around in there. And this 4th guy is unlike anything I've ever seen before. So verse 26 then says, Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire, And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. Everybody wanted to hear what was going to go on, what was going to happen. And they saw these men on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. However, their ropes had been burned off. So they were not tied. They were walking around. They didn't smell like smoke. Not a hair on their head was singed. It was amazing. It's like the fire wasn't even there. And Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor..." Hang on, my Bible keeps flipping. I am so sorry. "And yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own." So he is praising God. He's figured out, I haven't destroyed this God of Daniel. I haven't obliterated this God of the Hebrew people. He's still alive, he's still well, and he's still protecting his people. So therefore, he says, "I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap." Why? Because there is no other God who can deliver like this. So again, he is praising God. He is extolling the virtues and the abilities and the power of the God of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he has seen once again the power of God Almighty. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. They were already in charge of all the Chaldeans. Now they've even moved up higher. And so what the Chaldeans meant for evil, God meant for good, just like the story of Joseph. Joseph told his brothers when he finally revealed himself, "You guys did all this stuff to me, but what you meant for evil, God meant for good." And that's why we have to trust his plan. We have to trust his plan. When it looks like things are just falling apart around us, we have to trust his plan. I read something the other day that said that living the Christian life is like doing a jigsaw puzzle, but you don't have the picture on the box. And that's hard. Any of you that's ever done a jigsaw puzzle, you got to have that picture to know where the pieces go, right? You can't just, you got to have some sort of guide. But God has the picture. God sees the big picture. And when it looks like things are just falling apart, we have to remember that it's just God putting the pieces where they need to go. And sometimes the pieces don't go where we think they ought to go. They don't fit here, but they fit over there. And so God is the one that's building this puzzle. Every now and then he allows us to help, but he's the one that's got the picture. He knows how it's supposed to turn out. He knows how my life and your life is supposed to turn out, and he knows how we're going to get there. And sometimes it's not the way that we would prefer to get there. We would prefer to get there on one straight path that's, just all, roses and rainbows and unicorns, and it's not always that way. And so it was like this with the people of Israel as well, but because the people of Israel knew that God had promised to make them a great nation. And he said, "I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you." And sometimes it looks in the Old Testament as if God is just about ready to wipe out the whole nation of Israel. But he's not doing that. He's always going to save a remnant. There's always going to be a small group of people that he's going to use to grow the nation again. And he fulfilled that promise in this story when those guards were killed by the fire. That's a fulfillment of the promise that he made to Abraham. "I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you." And God was giving Nebuchadnezzar a little taste of, hey, I'm still here. You may have destroyed my city, you may have destroyed my temple, but you cannot destroy me, and you won't destroy me. And I will always be here. And you may be king, and I may have given you power to rule the earth, but make no mistake, I am sovereign, and my will always be done. So when things start to look dark, when things look like they're just not working out, when things are falling apart, just remember that God's in control, and we have to trust the process, and we have to trust the plan. Somebody told me years ago that you need to trust God even when you can't trace him. When it just doesn't look like that he's doing anything, that's probably when he's doing the most. So anyway, think about this. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Next week, we will look at Daniel chapter 4 and continue on in this fascinating book. Till then, just if you've missed any episodes, go back and watch them and get caught up. And then we will start up with Daniel chapter 4 next week. And in the meantime, God bless. Thanks.